All right, I'd like to call the meeting to order. Would everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? Just want to note that for the roll call, Justin Valentine is traveling tonight for business, so I'm in his place. Could I hear a motion to approve the minutes of the last meeting?
So moved. Second.
Any questions? All those in favor? Aye. Ted and Dee. Okay. We're going to move on next to our education report.
Thank you. We're going to start this evening with Mrs. Jones, and she's going to talk to us about increasing family involvement in academics through family nights. So thank you, Mrs. Jones.
Well, good evening, and welcome to Ringing Rocks. I hope you make sure you get some treats because the Ringing Rocks PTA always does a fantastic job of providing treats for the board meetings. Tonight, thank you. Tonight I would like to share with you just a few things that we've been doing here at Ringing Rocks and across the district, actually. We've started this year having individual building literacy nights and math nights. And we do that so that we can help explain to parents in our community what our math program looks like and what our literacy program looks like, because as you know, as members of the board, the way we teach math and the way we teach reading has changed over the last several years, especially since we were children. And so that means it's different than the way our parents learned as well. So also now we need to explain to them what the PA Common Core means and what that looks like and how we have responded as a district to the PA Core. So I gave to you this evening a little packet, blue piece of paper that looks like this. And Daniel Voorhees, when he came, he helped put this together. He crafted this document with just a little bit of support with some of the principals. But just so that we have something to share with our parents, what is the PA Common Core? Because they hear about that, and we wanted to be able to provide some information to them as to what that really means to them as parents and to their students. In this packet, you will also see just commonly or perhaps frequently asked questions about reading, what leveled reading means, about our math program, and then how we collect and report out student progress. So one of the things that we had just a few weeks ago across the district and in the different elementary schools and here at Ringing Rocks was Literacy Night. Literacy Night was run by a host of teachers. Mrs. Taylor's actually in the audience this evening, and she was here. She's actually up on screen. You can see her there. But we had over 100 people here for Literacy Night, and the children and the parents went from station to station to learn reading strategies. So what the teachers did, it was almost like they were in a fishbowl. The teachers taught the reading strategy to the children, so the children were engaged in interacting that evening, but the parents could see how the teachers taught the children. Teachers also took time to explain reading strategies to parents, and we offered a lot of literature and games and tools to the parents so that they could take those suggestions home and replicate them at home so they know how to work with their child with today's rigorous standards and to meet them. So that was one of the things we did. I wanted to share with you, the next morning I received this email from a parent who, and I'll just read this to you because we wanted to share with you that parents do appreciate our effort, and we hope and see that it's making a difference. So Mrs. Van Gilder, a parent of one of our first graders, wrote, "I feel compelled to write this evening, even at this late hour rolls by. I am honored and proud to be a parent of a Ringing Rocks student. Your teachers, reading specialists, and all other volunteers should be thanked for their professionalism, expertise, and dedication. I know how much planning, preparation, creativity, and resource gathering goes into a literacy night, and it was seamless. I wanted to thank you for all you, your staff, and the district has done to impress upon parents the power of literacy and learning, the power of a rigorous curriculum engaged and reflected teachers, and an instructional leader we're seeing tonight and should be celebrated. So thank you for reaching out to parents, sharing wisdom and practical reading strategies, and addressing the rigor of the new standards with our most impressionable kids. I can't say it any better than what that parent said. So all of, the teachers taught all day, we were here all day, and then it was kind of like we had balloons and music, Pete the Cat, but we were teaching reading and helping parents do that. So then just last week we had math night. And so we explained a little bit about everyday math to our parents. And again, the parents and their children traveled to stations. And they played math games. They watched as teachers taught little mini lessons and were able to ask questions. What they did, the parents traveled with their children, and we were able to pass out games, things that go with the everyday math program. So again, parents could take the materials home and practice and reinforce learning with their children at home. One of the moms, the mom on the right-hand side that you see with her daughter, she came up to me at the end of the evening and said, "Thank you so much for doing this. I really understand a little bit more about how the homework is to be completed and what that means and how to play these games." So we want to keep having these types of events and grow them even more so that we have an opportunity to explain to our parents what we're doing, and it also just really promotes a very positive community here at Ringing Rocks. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions, please let me know.
I have one. It's one of the most common things I see, and you gave us this frequently asked question on the Common Core and the PA Core. And one of the most common things I see in social media, and honestly, I'll editorialize and say it drives me crazy, is a arcane everyday math problem that is like 32 minus 12, and yet it's extremely complicated in terms of the solution. And it usually comes with a heading, "This is Common Core," and it's filled with vitriol about Common Core. And I guess I don't even know if it's a question. It just seems to me that people are continually misunderstanding the difference between everyday math or other math programs and Common Core, and there really isn't a connection between them. And my question is, do I understand that correctly? Other than that we use everyday math as to satisfy the Common Core.
You are correct. You are correct.
But you don't need to have everyday math to satisfy the requirements of of the Common Core. That's just a choice that we've made.
The Common Core is state mandated, and I explain it to parents as this is what every child should know and be able to do by the time they leave kindergarten all the way up through 12th grade, so that they're college and career ready. And we have chosen in Pottsgrove to use the Everyday Math program, and then you also have in your packet information about guided reading. We have selected a guided reading methodology to teach reading. We are seeing fantastic success. Last year when our kindergartners left, every single kindergarten student was reading by the end of the school year. That didn't happen before. That's also a testimony to full-day kindergarten. So in your packet, you received information that we passed out to parents at Literacy Night, and we will pass out something similar to this at conferences, and that is what is leveled reading. Because when parents hear that, they think, well, what's an A? If my child's reading a book that's at an A level, what does that mean? So if you look in the packet, you'll see we have developed a pamphlet so that a parent can say, okay, I have a first grader, and if she's reading at a level E, this is what a level E text looks like. So when they go to the bookstore, they want to order a book from the programs, the Scholastic Reader programs that we send home through the schools, they know what to order, and it gives them information about what the text looks like, and then we're also going to give them more specific information about children as readers developmentally. So if a child is reading at this level, at the beginning, they point, they use their fingers, they track. As they become stronger readers, they stop doing that and they read with their eyes only. So we're going to, in that information that we'll be passing out at conference time, we're going to talk about not just the levels, but also what those behaviors of a reader are, and then where we need them to be by the end of the year. So parents have a very clear-cut understanding. If my child is here, by the end of second grade, he or she should be at a letter M. This is where we want them. So we're giving them those goals so that they can, with the information that we're providing, help get them there. Okay.
I had a question. Sorry. We've just gone through the state scores that scores our district, scores our schools, and things like that. And so within that, part of the score is promotion rates. So we obviously we want to promote children, and that's part of the school assessment. But also with the Common Core, there are things that they need to be learning before they can be promoted. So how do you, what do you do whenever a child is not, they're not ready to be promoted, to be able to get them to that point where they can be promoted?
Our goal is to make sure every child is ready. And the way we do that is we provide very strong interventions along the way. So we have just recently conducted our first round of data team meetings. So the teachers have completed with the students their first benchmarks in reading. So we meet as data teams and we look at the children in every grade level and see where they are. We know, I bet Mrs. Taylor could tell you who her students are like that she's really working hard to pull them up. We know who's doing very, very well. We know we know where every child is, and we're providing interventions along the way. So they might receive title support. They might receive additional support from one of our reading specialists or the math title teacher. We also have a strong volunteer team that's coming in and working with students in the classroom because they've been trained by our teachers and our reading specialists to help provide additional supports within the school system.
I have one other comment I wanted to make, and that is, as you know, the PA performance profiles were just released, and I spent a little bit of time looking at all the schools. And I have to say that I was really impressed with how the third grade did in the testing last year, which is a testimony to the efforts of the K through 2s, both West and here at Rocks. So hats off to you and your teachers for a job well done.
Thank you very much for saying that, and I will be sure to share that with our faculty because they need to hear that as often as they can because they are working so hard with the youngest of children who come in. We have children who arrive at our front door thinking a glue stick is lip gloss, and we have a lot of work to do. So thank you.
Mrs. Jones, I have one more question for you, actually. Knowing at this age level, the K through 2 is so important to have parental support and guidance at home. What percentage of parents do you know participated in these two events that you had?
Our percentages were not as high as we would have liked. So one of the things that we've been thinking about is how can we increase this? How can we maybe combine literacy night with another event? So already with some of the teachers and our PTA, we've been talking about combining it with the book fair next year, with the family night, and really making it a training session, but also an atmosphere where parents come and children look forward to coming. As you could see in some of the pictures, we had balloons and we had prizes and we had music, all around literacy. And we had a fantastic night. So we hope that by offering these events consistently and promoting them district-wide, that it will gain more traction.
At this time, I'm going to ask Mr. Daniel Voorhees to come up and just speak to you a little bit about our professional development day that we just had last week, I believe. Was it last week? It was last week. They're all running together. At the elementary level, we were focused on guided reading. At the secondary level, we've been working with our staff on preparations for the thoughtful implementation of our one-to-one initiative and continued professional development in that area. And for all staff, including bus drivers, secretaries, aides, teachers, we had a fantastic day with Dr. Ginsberg. I think I mentioned to you, and Daniel can just maybe speak briefly to that, and then we're going to talk about math.
Good evening, everyone. Is this on? Can you hear me? All right, thank you. Lisa warmed up the microphone for me, so I appreciate that, Lisa. Thank you. We did want to share with you the intense professional learning that we had going on last week, and that was really among it spanned several topics. So what are some of the things that happened? The first and probably the biggest part of the day, and what had teachers really ramped up, was Dr. Ken Ginsberg. He's really an adolescent pediatrician. He works for Children's Hospital of Pennsylvania. He's also a professor. But his big topic is how do we teach resiliency to children? So he talks about all the different types of trauma. And when I say trauma, when I thought back to my childhood and I thought of trauma, I think of these really awful things. But trauma, as you all know, can be your daughter breaks up with her boyfriend. You know, that can be the most traumatic thing to a 14 or a 15 or a 16-year-old. So he talked about trauma in those kinds of terms. What are those types of trauma that are occurring daily in a child's life? And what are the ways in which we can help children cope with those particular things? So although he focuses primarily on adolescence, the power of his message really spans long before adolescence and long after. So on the morning of November 4th, it was Election Day, which seems like it was about 4 months ago, but that was just last week. On the morning, we had our entire staff. So we had bus drivers, our guidance counselors, all of our professional staff. We had anybody who works in Pottsgrove was at this event, because we felt it important that everybody hear the message, because from very early on in the morning, a bus driver could very likely be the very first person who's going to know that a child's having a bad day. So we had everybody engaged in that conversation. The afternoon really focused on Dr. Ginsberg working with a smaller group of our internal folks, really looking at our pupil services department, so thinking about our psychologists and our guidance counselors, and we had him working specifically with that particular group, because then they can start to kind of begin to think about what are the ways in which we continue this message long after November 4th, okay? For the remainder of our staff, the afternoon focused on some one-to-one kinds of things with implementation, so teachers were generating some more familiarity with that topic, and the elementary was really looking again at our balanced literacy. They were looking at guided reading, and they were really planning out what reading lessons look like over the course of the year. So they've been engaged in really targeted professional development. At the secondary level, we've really focused in on the one-to-one. At the elementary level, we continue to be really focused upon the balanced literacy. So to give you a short overview of what this looks like, we have a 2-minute video for you to take a look at and give you a feel of what the day was all about.
And I wanted to thank the Pottstown Health and Wellness Foundation. They funded Dr. Ginsburg coming to work with us, and now because of that opportunity that we had, Dr. Ginsburg is actually very excited about partnering with Pottsgrove and letting us help him pilot his curriculum that comes with another book that he wrote, not the one that you saw up on the screen, but it's about providing lessons for building resiliency in children and lessons for our staff on how to reduce their stress and also be able to identify stress in our children and how we can help them work through some of these things. So we are going to be continuing that work with him. Dr. Roberts and I have a meeting scheduled with him for December to start those conversations. So that's really exciting for us that he actually selected us. He said we're close to him, within an hour in Philadelphia, and he would just like he'd like to get his materials out there, and he saw our enthusiasm and thought that we'd be a great place to partner. So we're excited about that. Additionally, tonight we're going to talk a little bit about math. I know from the last board meeting there were quite a few questions that were still kind of unanswered or unclear to certain board members, so I asked Mr. Voorhees to work with the math coach, Mrs. Rose Belinsky, and also our department chair, Mrs. Holly Artem, for the high school. She's the high school math department chair, and put a presentation together for you tonight to hopefully answer the questions. There's a couple of things in your packet that I wanted to point out. One, you have a document called Math Progression, and we'll be showing this on the slide very succinctly, but this is just something for you to scribble some notes on as we're talking about this. And then there are two follow-up documents that I thought were quite compelling. One is from the National Council of Teachers for Mathematics, and it's a little bit more of a heavy read, but if you're into the research about the mathematical practices and what math instruction should look like, I would recommend that document. And also, it just so happens that I was trying to get to the bottom of my inbox today, and Educational Leadership just came out with a brand new volume of their journal. And wouldn't you know, they had an article called Talking About Math. And as I perused this is a really nice article for, most of us as laymen, not mathematicians, just talking about how our teachers are going about teaching mathematics and the conversations that they're having with students to help them discover. And I know that was kind of a bone of contention of sorts with parents because it's not the way we learned math. We learned math from rote memorization. The problems were put on the board, and we did them, and we did them, and we did them, and the teacher showed them to us, and we did some more. This is a completely different mindset, and it's about having conversation with students, having them discover, having them look at many, many ways that perhaps a problem could be solved, and have conversation with each other about that, and learning tools for their toolbox. And I thought that this would be something that you might want to follow up with. So that being said, I'm going to ask Mr. Voorhees to come up. Thank you.
Good evening once again. Long time no see. So we did have a number of things that we wanted to come back to and revisit this evening as we're continuing. Just as Mrs. Jones was sharing, part of our efforts are really educating everyone about why does math look different from the way I learned and probably from the ways many of you have learned. So as we have that conversation tonight, we wanted to talk very succinctly about a couple of things. Number one, and to Mr. Rabinowitz's point, we keep hearing Common Core, we keep hearing PA Core, and we keep hearing about these legacy standards. And yet, we probably don't all have a really solid knowledge about what that really means. So what we're going to try or attempt to do this evening is show you exactly what the difference between the two is, so that you get a feeling for what does it look like within a legacy standard, and then what does it look like within Common Core or PA Core, so that we're now dealing with. We also want to talk specifically about what does the math progression look like here in Pottsgrove. As I talk about that, really this should say math progressions, because by saying it in the singular tense, it's really showing that there's only one. There are really quite a few different ways in which a child can progress through math, and our goal there is really providing multiple pathways for students to demonstrate success with mathematical understandings. We also want to talk about what's changing this year with our 2015 PSSAs and how that looks different from what has occurred in the past. So in order to talk about this, I invited Mrs. Rose Belinsky. Mrs. Rose Belinsky is our curriculum and instruction coach working K-12. And we also have Mrs. Holly Artem. Holly Artem is our department chair and also teaches high school math. So they're here this evening to really talk about what is this difference that we keep hearing about in terms of Common Core and legacy standards.
Good evening. Thank you for allowing us to be here and talk with you about my favorite subject, mathematics. We're very excited. When we think about Common Core and legacy, there's really a big difference in student understanding. When I went to school, my teacher taught me the algorithms. I practiced the algorithms. We did some on the board. We took a test on that set of algorithms, and then we moved to the next unit, forgot about those algorithms. We may have had a few word problems thrown in here and there, but that was the biggest, the most struggle or the most high cognitive demanding task I had in mathematics as a student was a word problem. Well, since I was in 8th grade algebra, the world has changed dramatically, and the kind of education that children need to have to be successful, they need to be problem solvers, not just in mathematics, but they need to be problem solvers in life. Mathematics now is, we're teaching algorithms. Algorithms continue to be important, but we're also teaching children how to think mathematically and how to use their mathematics to solve real-life problems. So as we look at task 1, this is a pretty straightforward task. This is probably a kind of problem that you would have seen on Pennsylvania legacy standards. Martha was recarpeting her bedroom that was 15 feet long and 10 feet wide. How many square feet of carpeting will she need to purchase? So in the legacy standards test, children received a formula sheet. So all they had to do was pull that formula out, area equals length times width, and there was the answer. It was very straightforward, very little struggle. It was right there, very procedural. So now, the way Common Core looks at this and PA Core, if you take a look at this problem, Mrs. Brown's class will raise rabbits for their spring science fair. They have 24 feet of fencing to build a rectangular rabbit pen to keep the rabbits. If Mrs. Brown's students want their rabbits to have as much room as possible, how long would each of the sides of the pen be? Be sure to make your thinking visible. So let's think about that problem. What are children going to need to understand? They're going to need to know what area is. They're going to need to understand perimeter. But what's really interesting about this, there are so many different entry points for a student to be able to solve just that first step. There's more than one way to solve that. You can't look right at that problem like the last one and solve it immediately. We're teaching children how to deal with that productive struggle, how to use their prior learning about rectangles and squares and perimeter and area, math facts, multiplication facts, to get into the first question. So if you can think about task 1 and task 2, that's the big difference of what our children are learning and doing and understanding.
Hi, thank you again for letting us speak tonight. I just wanted to say, I know sometimes when we look at that, we think, oh, that's just more stuff that we're asking the kids to do. That looks like just filling up the screen more. In a classroom, as a teacher, that might be a chunked type of an assignment. So the classroom is not me standing up in front of the class, like Ms. Kowinski had said. You know, it's more in a collaborative setting, maybe tables where students are working together, and it's very differentiated. So one group might be ready, you know, reading that problem to start, and then they go through number 1, they have some ideas, they talk to me about what they're thinking, I kind of give them some strategies of what to do next, and then they might be ready to go to the next step. That doesn't mean that every table might not be ready to do that, or every group. So it's a very differentiating setting in the sense that maybe one group's at this step, maybe one group's here. It's a lot of me making sure that each group is given what they need as well. She talked about also it doesn't have to be done just one way, which, I mean, I know when I went to school, you did it the way the teacher did it, or it was wrong and there were no questions asked, and that was the end of the story. You know, they could draw a picture, they could talk something out, they could use technology. We have kids that are amazing when it comes to using graphing calculators and computers, and they might have something to do and share with us that way. So there's multiple different ways to do it. As a teacher, it's eye-opening because, you know, maybe I only learned how to do it one way, or maybe I have a very closed way of looking at things. So now it's like, oh wow, that makes more sense. Maybe I could have tried it that way. and they can help each other. So there might be somebody in the class who says, I don't really know how to do this, but another child might actually give a suggestion that helps them. Just the collaboration and the communication in the classroom is amazing. And I just wanted to share that with everybody, that the things that I'm getting from the students, it's not just about the math, it's about being able to communicate that, not being afraid to take a risk, and come up with answers together. That's just important. My two oldest daughters go to West in first grade and kindergarten, so as a mom, the things that I'm seeing that's happening in the math classroom is amazing to me. I'm happy that my daughters are excited about math. Most people aren't. So it's starting young, and it's going to continue. As a math teacher, I see my daughter doing, help me, it's arrows and frames and arrows. I mean, that's algebra. So I'm looking at this like, my daughter's in first grade and she's doing algebra. This is awesome. That's a testament to what the elementary school teachers are doing with our students here, across the district. I know that as a math teacher, I see all of that stuff, and sometimes, even my husband's looking at it like, well, what is she doing? This looks completely different, and I try to explain that. So it's really amazing stuff that's going on from kindergarten all the way up to what I see in the high school. I'm extremely excited to see what happens as the years go through, and this continues to go. The possibilities are amazing that I can see happening.
So as we look at the 8 mathematical practices, this is really what makes Common Core and PA math different. These 8 practices are what children do with mathematics. It's how they build their conceptual understanding. It's how they learn those mathematics, the connections between all the different concepts. Our instructional practices are geared around engaging kids in these practices. And if you look at these practices, they're important for mathematics, but really, think about those. Isn't that what every employer would want an employee to be able to do? If we think about it. So it's that high level of thinking, and it's that student engagement, and as Mrs. Arden said, it's the love for mathematics, the collaborative part, and we see wonderful things happening with our kids. If you have an opportunity to go in a math classroom, and it's so exciting to hear them talk about mathematics, to really have using mathematical vocabulary accurately, and being excited about math, and not giving up when things are hard. I think that not giving up when things are hard is something that, if we can teach children to do that, that's the key to their success. Because life is not an algorithm. I love mathematics, but it's more of a big, high cognitive demanding task. It's more problem solving than it is an algorithm. We need the algorithms, but we need to know how to use those algorithms.
Could I just ask a quick question? Sorry. While I have you guys. I know for me, the biggest kind of complaint or worry that I hear from parents from kindergarten all the way up through, senior level is, math looks different now than when we were in school. And so there's a little bit of a concern that the parents don't recognize the frames and the arrows and things like that. And so if their child is struggling, then they don't feel equipped to help them. So what would you, and I'm glad we have you guys here because you're the teachers and you're right in there in the trenches. What would you suggest to a parent if they are concerned that their child is struggling and they don't know how to help them?
I guess I would say talking to the teacher themselves and getting some ideas. I know at the elementary school level, I get papers that come home that kind of explain what is a frame and an arrow, because even myself, I teach math, but it is different the way that, that it's the approach to it. So they do send some things home that explain that.
Well, for everyday math, they have a great website for parents that teach parents step by step how to get through the algorithms, the frames and arrows. So the more connected we can get parents with that, and I know at Math Nights we actually had sessions on that. That's a great resource. I think teachers are great resources. I know a lot of our teachers in middle school and high school have a lot of things on their websites to help kids and help parents. I think it's coming to the math nights. We're planning to have more math nights to help parents, because it's, you know, when you see your child struggling and you're not understanding how to help them, it's frightening. So we're trying to build capacity in our parents as well as our kids. So I would encourage parents to contact the teachers, contact the principals, and we're going to try to have more math nights to keep building, because it is new, and sometimes you need to hear it more than once and hear it in a different way, because it's a very different way of learning than how we learned.
Thanks. So as we continue to move forward, I'll ask that you think about or keep these 8 mathematical practices in mind. As you're thinking about those and looking at them, it's important to know that those are K-12 mathematical practices. So a kindergartner, the way in which a kindergartner applies that is going to look very different from a student who's in 12th grade. But in fact, those are things, mathematical practices that span a child's learning here in Pottsgrove. The other thing that we wanted to draw your attention to, and I know this has been talked about a couple times, but it's almost hard to believe, so I want to bring your attention back to it. In the 2012-13 school year, per PDE's direction, we were asked to begin preparing for the switch or the alignment or the move to Common Core state standards, okay? During that time, however, the spring 2013 PSSA tests were still based on the legacy standards, okay? 2013-14 hits, our students take the 2014 assessment in the spring, and interesting, we were at that time, per PD, required to have all of our work aligned now with Common Core state standards. However, the PSSA was still based upon the old legacy standards, okay? Moving forward this year and beyond, now PSSAs are aligned with the Common Core state standards and are aligned with our work here in Pottsgrove. So finally, the stars have aligned, we're hoping, as long as PDE doesn't change for us yet again, okay? So what does that mean in terms of our internal work? You see the 3 initials up there, PLC, that stands for Professional Learning Community. Those are teams of teachers sitting around a table and talking about what lessons are we doing, what curriculum do we have to cover, what content needs to be addressed, what standards are coming up in the next lessons, and they're having conversations about what that looks like in daily instruction. The other part of tonight that we wanted to talk about was math progressions here in Pottsgrove, because what we wanted to do was paint a picture of at least some of the different pathways a student can take in terms of their mathematical career here in Pottsgrove. So it's important to remember we're going to attempt to show you just a couple, but this table is almost a mathematical problem in itself. It's kind of like there are 6 purple shirts and 5 green pants and 18 different kinds of shoes. How many different outfits can you make? That's kind of how the math problem, or that's kind of how math progressions look, because there are so many different pathways. Our end goal is to offer as many pathways as possible while monitoring student achievement so that students are as successful as possible in terms of their mathematical understandings. So we have our young man here. He's entering the middle school. He's taking 6th grade Common Core. It's connected math at the middle school. As he continues along, he's going to, and by the way, this is kind of if you want to call it a typical track. I don't like the word track. Path is a better word, okay? In 8th grade, that child is going to take 8th grade Common Core. So you ask, well, why does it look like that? It's important to note that PDE has standards, the PA core standards, go right up to 8th grade in both ELA and math, and far beyond, actually. However, they say this is what a grade 8 math student should be learning in their classroom, okay? After grade 8, a student has a decision to make. There's 2 different paths this student can decide upon, and there's very specific criteria defined for what this might look like. So this child can decide if he's going to take Algebra 1 or he can take Intensified Algebra. Algebra 1 is a 1.5 credit course, so it offers students 3 out of a 6-day cycle, a double period of math. So students are getting a good amount of math instruction. If you're going down the intensified algebra, you're looking at a double period of math every day out of a 6-day cycle, okay? Hence the word intensified, all right? So how do we decide about which students are going to take that? again, there's specific criteria defined for that. Primarily, we're looking at students who have large gaps in their mathematical understandings for the intensified algebra. This course is designed as an intervention. Somebody was talking about what do you do when a student's not quite there. This is an intervention that's in place to help students with their understandings of those 8 mathematical practices. So we'll assume that that child has moved on from Algebra 1 or intensified Algebra 1. The student's moving on to geometry in grade 10. And a student could elect to take this with Algebra 2. So you say, boy, that sounds like an awful lot of work. We do, in fact, have students who are taking geometry in unison with Algebra 2 and who are finding a lot of success with that. So again, does that mean every student's doing it? Not at all, but it is a pathway that students could follow. So let's assume that that child takes algebra in 10th grade. He is then taking Algebra 2 in 11th grade. And then in grade 12, he has some decisions to make. If he's a student who is looking at taking calculus or wants to take calculus or needs to take calculus at some point in a later career or for jobs or whatever the case may be, that student's going to take trigonometry. Trigonometry is almost like the gatekeeping world to calculus, if you will. Or the student could elect, if the student took trigonometry, they could take that with AP Stats. Does that mean that every child is going to take AP Statistics with trigonometry? No, it does not. However, it's a pathway that students can follow. The student could also take probability and statistics. What I don't want anybody to think is that trigonometry is a higher level course than probability and statistics. They're not designed that way. They're simply designed as if you're moving on to calculus, you're going to go the trigonometry route. If you don't have a need or a want for the calculus route, you're going to take probability and statistics. So of course, there's lots of conversations that occur with students to have understanding about that. So let's jump back to grade 10 for a minute. Let's assume that this child takes geometry in grade 10 and he takes that in unison with Algebra 2. What happens for that student? Again, he has some decisions to make which look very similar to some of those decisions he had in grade 12 had he followed the other path. So this student, again, could take trigonometry. He could elect to take that with an AP Statistics course, or he could take probability and statistics. Those decisions are based upon the criteria, or based upon what I described just previously. In grade 12, all sorts of different options now present themselves for this student. Okay, so you can see that student could then be looking at AP Calc AB, let's try that again. Differential Calc, AP Calc, that's up there twice, or AP Stat. Or the child could be engaged in dual enrollment, so taking college and high school courses simultaneously. Okay? So that's just one path that a student could follow. What's another path that looks? And this will be a little shorter because I don't necessarily need to describe everything, because you're going to start to see some of the same courses pop up, but now they're going to pop up in a different sequence. So I might enter the pathway very similar to the last child I just described, but now all of a sudden I find myself having some success. What does that mean? It means I've demonstrated proficiency or advanced test scores on PSSAs. It means my math teachers are noticing I'm doing some fantastic work, so that means my math grades are showing. It means my math teachers have looked at my understanding of those 8 mathematical practices and said, this child really understands what this content looks like. So what we will put into place for next year is a 7-8 Common Core connected condensed. What does that mean? It takes all the content from 7th grade math and 8th grade math, condenses it in preparation for a child taking Algebra 1 in 8th grade. Okay? Does that mean that's the only way to get into Algebra 1? No, it does not, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Okay? So we see this Algebra 1 pop up as an option for this student in grade 8. Okay? I'm going to stop here for a minute because this is where we had some questions in terms of what does Algebra 1 look like in grade 8? How are we making those decisions? What does that look like on a day-to-day basis? So how are we going to make decisions about when a child is taking Algebra 1 in grade 8? We're looking again at children's PSSA scores. We're looking at their test grades in the class assignments. we're looking at teachers' kind of reflection of students' understanding of those 8 mathematical practices, okay? But let's remember for a minute, we also go back to last year and we had a test, a state test, PSSA, which was not aligned to the Common Core, okay? So in order to make sure that all students were prepared, well prepared to move on to the next math, we took our time and really carefully analyzed each student's preparation. So what does that mean? Because the test, the PSSA test, wasn't aligned, we spent more time looking at a district-developed assessment as part of that criteria, and we also spent more time at looking at each student's understanding of those 8 mathematical practices, okay? So for a moment, we have a student in grade 8 who can take Algebra 1. That student will then take geometry in grade 9. And here's where you're going to start to see some of those similar things now pop up that you saw in the pathway in the upper chart, okay? Only now they're going to show up at a different point in this child's path, okay? So I won't talk about each one of those, but I did want you to see those are different opportunities, yet another path that a student can take. So one thing I want to note is every time you see one of those yellow circles, there's an or in there. A yellow circle indicates a choice for a student. That means they have a choice based upon their mathematical understanding, based upon their current performance levels, they have a choice to make in terms of what they want to do in terms of math. That child, if he decided to take geometry with Algebra 2 in grade 9, would then, again, have a similar path he is following. But again, it opens up different options at a different point in that child's path. Okay? And of course, I'm going to stop after this and allow you to ask questions, but I wanted to be kind of really explicit in looking at the multiple paths here. Okay? What's a third rather large pathway that students can take? We have those students in grade 5 who are already showing readiness or signs of readiness for Algebra 1. Okay? So how do we know that? PSSA. We know that by looking at students' grades. We know that by looking at the 8 mathematical standards. And we know that by utilizing a district-developed assessment. Okay? So this is currently in place. A child can come out of 5th grade math, go immediately into a 6-7 condensed. That's very similar to the 7-8 one I described up above, only now it's occurring and it's combining the content of 6th and 7th grade math, preparing a child to then take Algebra 1 in 7th grade. So of course, that changes the pathway that this child can take. And one thing that pops up different is because if this child is taking Algebra 1 in 7th grade, he or she can then move into an honors geometry in 8th grade or an honors Algebra 2 in 9th grade. And then, of course, you start seeing some of those choices, those yellow stars popping up again. But again, they're at different points in this child's path because he or she has utilized a different route to get there. Not a lower level route, nothing's different, it's just a different, he followed a different pathway based upon his or her readiness and understanding of those mathematical practices. So what's a fourth option? A fourth option is a student can absolutely show that he or she is ready to take Algebra 1 in grade 6. I'm not going to talk about those criteria again because I think I've mentioned them. But that can occur. And in fact, we have 6th graders who are currently taking Algebra 1. Okay? Now, what happens for that child is you see many of those similar options pop up, but again, this pathway looks a little bit different because those options pop up now for this child at different times in their mathematical career. Okay? Now, I keep talking about multiple pathways here. One of the things I want to say, as soon as this chart is all filled in, is there is no way in which I can show every mathematical pathway. Okay? So let me give you an example. One thing that's not represented up here is students in grade 6 having the ability to jump immediately into Algebra 1. That wasn't necessarily designed as a path. Does it happen? Can it happen? It absolutely happens. How does it happen? We're looking back at that specific criteria. One of the things that we're looking very carefully and we're moving towards doing this year is providing yet another universal screener for all students in grades 5 through 7, okay? So when I say universal screener, what in the world does that mean? It means that here's an assessment, here's a tool that we can utilize with all of our students as yet another data point to show us when students are ready to take Algebra 1. Now, do the results of that absolutely mean that a child's ready to take Algebra 1? No, they don't, because that's why we have a district-developed assessment, which provides further information about students' understanding of each mathematical strand. That's why we have teachers. That's why we have PSSA results. All of that information is looked at very carefully on a student-by-student basis so that we can make decisions about when and how to move students through this progression of learning. A final thought that I want to make sure that we say is what we don't want to do is just push kids along in their mathematical content, just for the sake of pushing them along. What what the research shows about how children and how adults learn, for that matter, is that if you're pushing them before they are ready for these mathematical concepts, what happens? Probably all the things that you can imagine. What's going to happen is I'm going to be turned off by math. I want nothing to do with math. I'm going to feel frustrated in math. I'm going to feel like a failure in math. Those are all things that we do not want to have happen. We want to have our students feeling successful, and we're working very hard and applying different mindsets so that students are entering problems with a different mindset. They're thinking about, I may not know the answer to this, but I'm going to try all sorts of different sets or all different paths in order to find an answer to this problem. Okay? So with that, I've done a lot of talking. So I'll stop and I'll allow you to ask any questions that you may have in terms of mathematical concepts here in Pottsgrove.
I have a quick question. Who actually helps the student make these decisions? Could you explain that so the public would know?
Sure, and I know Dr. Ramage is in the audience. He can talk about this probably even more specifically. What occurs, again, as I said, it is a student-by-student process. So they're looking at all those individual criteria. They're looking at the data that they have for each particular student. Guidance counselors are involved in that conversation. Parents are involved in that conversation. Teachers are involved in that conversation. And both Mr. Becker and Dr. Ramage are involved in that conversation. Correct.
I have a few questions. Regarding the progression, the first progression, which a large number of our current 8th grade students are going to be facing. Can you give me a sense, in terms of numbers or percentage, I don't really care, of how many students in the high school are currently dual enrolled in math courses?
I have a lot of numbers in front of me, Mr. Rabinowitz. I'm not sure I have those numbers.
Okay.
So the current number of students in a dual enrollment course, unless Dr. Ziegler, you know that offhand, I don't know off the top of my head.
Well, I'd like to know that because, I mean, I keep hearing that, scheduling at the high school, scheduling in all the courses that a student wants to take at the high school level can be a challenge. And so throwing 2 major courses in a schedule might cause a student to have to bump something else that is also a fairly high priority for them. So I'm trying to get a sense as to how realistic it is, and I recognize from what Shelley has said previously that some students are doing it, but some could be one, or some could be a lot. So I'm just trying to get a sense as to what that means. And even in the best case scenario, the furthest a student can get in this progression is to Calc AB, assuming that they can do the dual enrollments that we're talking about. They can't really make it to BC,
Well,
correct?
that may not necessarily be true, and here's why. Because if I'm looking at that top row that we talked about, and I can put that back up on the screen. If I'm looking at that top row there, just because I started in that top row doesn't mean I'm finishing or following that top row the whole way through, okay? So I showed some of the ways in which a student might jump, but again, if I'm a student entering grade 6 up there in blue, and I'm showing ability to move on to Algebra 1 following my 6th grade year, I have every ability to do that. so long as the measurements up against those established criteria show that I'm ready to do that.
Okay, but our current 8th grade students are pretty much locked into this track. If they're taking Common Core 8, then they're not going to get algebra till 9, right?
Correct.
So their ability to jump at that point seems pretty limited to me. Wouldn't you agree?
So I would agree with that.
Okay.
So, and let's have a conversation about exactly why that occurred, because I'm not sure I spoke about that, and it's an excellent question. So we do have a 1-year period of time during which we have more students following that upper pathway there. Why is that? Because what happened, per the state, is 8th grade mathematical content, or standards, backed up into 7th grade. 7th did the same thing back into 6th. As a result, we had students, what we had to do was put together systems to allow students to move on. What we did not want to do is push every kid into Algebra 1 at 8th grade if in fact he or she was not ready.
So that leads me to the next question.
Sure.
Is it possible in a hypothetical scenario for a student who maybe doesn't want to be overly challenged for whatever reason to deliberately not do well on that test in order to avoid taking a course, or would we be smart enough to realize that they did it based on all the other criteria?
And that's why we have multiple sets of criteria, because what you bring up is a good point. Could that hypothetically happen? Absolutely it could happen, because at the end of the day, kids are kids, right?
Right.
Adults are adults for that matter. So could that happen? Absolutely. We have established criteria across multiple data points so that we're not just looking at one data point. What we don't want to ever do for any child, for any intervention for that matter, is only look at PSSA data. That's just one picture of one piece of a child's educational career. Our goal is to have multiple data points so that we're making a really comprehensive decision about if this child's ready.
Okay, I'm going to move on. I have 2 more questions.
Sure.
Productive struggle. Is productive struggle a requirement for teaching the Carnegie curriculum, or are other delivery methods feasible?
So one of the things, in order to answer that question, I want to paint a picture for you if I can. It's important to note that we have curriculum and we have programs, and there is in fact a difference. Curriculum are what we're looking at developing pacing and sequencing based upon those standards that have been developed for us. That is our curriculum. The programs, the resources, are those tools that we utilize to help our kids develop those understandings of those individual pieces of content, okay? So, when you say, is that a kind of a prerequisite, if you will, for Carnegie? No, it's not. Actually, when you look at productive struggle, that can occur within any program that you're utilizing. And the goal there is that students are thinking, what we don't want to have happen is put a problem in front of students and say, oh, I'm stupid, I can't figure this out, I can't get it like that. Because that's not what math is all about. I'm faced with mathematical problems every day, tonight being one of them, for example, right? So we're faced with those mathematical concepts every day. If we were to just give up and kind of throw our hands up, what we're teaching students to do, or what we're really saying is, you're not smart, you're not getting it on the first attempt. We want to develop opportunities for students to have multiple opportunities to really develop that mathematical thinking.
Okay, I said...
And that the article that I put in your packet is not about a particular resource or curriculum, but it speaks about having students engage and discover, and it doesn't matter what resource we're using. But this talks about productive struggle. But I think it's a little bit different than just having kids feel frustration. It's having kids discover. It's having kids discuss. It's having kids debate or argue, or which different ways to solve problems. And it's helping their learning. And that's what this is talking about. And this isn't a curriculum.
Okay, and then I said one more, but you fueled one extra one. Is productive struggle currently taught in a uniform manner so that every teacher is using the precepts or concepts in the exact same way?
That's an excellent question, because productive struggle is not something I'm just innately going to do. It's something that we can, in fact, teach, and it's something that we need to teach. So what does that look like? It means we're presenting to children and we're saying, guess what? I'm going to present to you a problem today that you're not necessarily going to know the answer to, and that's okay. And providing students from the very beginning with the understanding that they're not going to get it like this. So you're absolutely right. It needs to be taught in a uniform manner so that all students are kind of progressing through that understanding in a similar fashion.
And it is being taught in
It
a
is
uniform
being
manner.
taught.
Okay. And then the last is again about productive struggle. And I'm going to just state a slight opinion. I think that it's a great thing. In fact, my son, who's in the 7th grade algebra course, not getting as high a grade as I want, but I'm convinced that the method works for him and for the people in his group that are taking math with him. But my question is it possible, and do we think it possible that productive struggle might not actually be productive for some of our students? And if so, what are we doing to address that possibility, or that, in my opinion, certainty?
So are there students who are going to enter productive struggle differently? There absolutely are. So what do we do? It kind of goes back to that question, what do we do when students aren't performing at any particular area the way we'd like them to be performing? It means we now intervene in a different way. It means now we're going to provide that child with a different entry point to that mathematical problem. What we don't want to do is have students get really frustrated at any one particular point and get stuck on that. I see Mrs. Belinsky moving toward me because she loves to talk about growth mindset and math for that matter.
So when we think about productive struggle is not just in mathematics. If you think of anything that you've ever done that has been an accomplishment, or any new learning that you've done, whether it be academic, whether it's cooking, dancing, playing a sport, there's always a point that you want to quit. It gets really hard and you're not sure if you can do it. And what we're trying to do with children is guide them through. That's their productive struggle. It's helping them access prior knowledge that they know, in our case about mathematics, but prior knowledge is the underpinning of all learning, really. And what we're trying to do is facilitate kids' thinking and their confidence to help them work through that productive struggle. We talk to children about, I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset, but we actually talk to kids about when they're working on something really challenging, there's quantitative evidence that their dendrites are actually becoming denser. So when they're working on those very complicated math problems, even if they don't get the exact solution, all the work and all the thinking that they're doing to get there, they're actually getting smarter. Their dendrites are becoming denser. And we talk to kids about that. We talk to kids about not giving up. And you know what? It's hard. It's hard to teach that. We've got to model it. We've got to talk to kids about their work ethic. Instead of how smart they are, we have to talk to them about how much work and their thinking. And that's how we teach them not to give up. So productive struggle is not just something that happens in mathematics. Productive struggles any time you're learning something new. And our teachers are becoming facilitators of children's thinking, and they're paying attention to our kids, and they're guiding them, and they're giving them the encouragement, and they're asking them the questions when they are stuck. They're not giving them answers, but they're guiding their thinking. They're just not giving them a problem and say, figure it out. They're asking guiding questions. I don't know if you...
Well, what she said, but productive struggle looks different for every kid in the classroom. Are there groups of kids that it's similar where, you know, it's working for them? Is it more challenging for other kids? Of course it is, because there's always that kid that says, I'm just not going to do it. And those are the days that are most challenging for me as the teacher, where I would be, I'm just going to give you the answer. But when you think of productive struggle, before it used to be a teacher standing in front of the room, writing stuff on the board and saying, oh yes, the answer's 6, everyone get it? And yeah, we got it, whatever, and go to try to do it on your own, and you were lost. So it's the idea of guiding them through the question, and me asking the questions, not just saying, here, figure that out on your own, and I'm going to go sit over here and do nothing. It's here's a question. let me pose this question and kind of have them step through the process on their own. As a teacher, they're remembering the concepts more than they did before. I'm seeing better results than I ever have. When I, just when I started teaching 15 years ago, and I'd be at the front of the room and all the kids were sitting nicely in their rows, and I'd write up stuff on the board and they got it, and then once the test was gone, they didn't remember any of it. But even after last year, when I had the kids go through this productive struggle and work through these math practices, their retention levels at the end of the year were so much better than they were before, and they're remembering it going into their geometry teachers. The conversations between grade levels from 8 to 9 and 9 to 10, they're happening all the time. Whether it's with parents or it's with students, and we're constantly checking up on our kids to making sure they are on the right path. The paths change all the time. If I could show you my email, constantly, can we have this meeting? Can we talk about this? It's amazing. It's about making sure the kids are following that path. And as it change, it's going to change, and that's good because it's just a very passionate thing. This productive struggle, and I hear that, and it's frustrating sometimes because it's not about saying just struggle through it and it's not a big deal. Just figure it out on your own and I'll walk away. It's more than that.
So at the end of the day, you're saying that it works for all kids?
I do believe that. I do
Okay.
think so. At different levels and at different times. Is it going to take one kid, that productive struggle? Maybe it lasts for 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, But at the end, I do believe that it's working for them.
And I think as teachers, we have to recognize when to step in and how much help and how much guidance to give. And I think we have very talented teachers that really care about our kids and are really listening to those math conversations, that they're knowing when to step in and they're knowing how much to step in. But it's hard for kids think that if they don't get something right away, they're not smart. And then they want to give up because they don't want anybody to know that they don't know it. So what we have to do is teach them that part of learning is productive struggle so that they're willing to work through it, so they're willing to expose that, yeah, I don't know this, but it doesn't mean that I'm not bright. It doesn't mean that I'm not smart. It just means that I have to work a little harder to get it. Think about it. Anything that we've learned that's really worthwhile, there's been a point or points of productive struggle. If it's easy, we're not teaching children anything new. They're just giving us back what someone taught them in prior years. So really, true learning has to involve productive struggle at some point. And it's our job as teachers and facilitators of thinking to know how to guide children through that. And that, as Mrs. Artem said, that doesn't look the same for every child.
I didn't have a question, but I just had a comment that I have 2 children, one who started in the top, and then once he took the tests, and he had great guidance counselors who then assessed and said, he's ready to move up, and he kind of skipped tracks. But also, I also have an older child who is in the dual enrollment. So, Rick, you asked about how many students are in dual enrollment. I don't know the exact number, but there's enough to, on a regular basis, have a meeting of all the kids that are in her dual enrollment class. So, several, at least, more than one, more than 2. But once again, with the help of the guidance counselors, assess the needs and her plans and looking at her goals and said, okay, this isn't going to fit into your schedule. Let's put you in a dual enrollment. Walked her through through everything. And she's a junior and she's already in a dual enrollment. So the guidance counselors in our school district are fabulous. They will absolutely sit down with you and your child and do what's best for your child. And they'll go out of their way, do whatever they have to, think outside the box to get your kid where you want them to be so they're ready to go to college and have the classes that they need to get there.
Thank you. I had one more thing that Mr. Faulkner reminded me about. We were presented by a plaque from the Rolling Hills Apartments by a social worker, Laura English. I just wanted to share with the board. And essentially, Rolling Hills presented this to us for the hard work and dedication of some of our staff members. We had Ringing Rocks and West and Lower Pottsgrove have donated items for the preschool. I know we have a board member that's instrumental in working through the preschool there. We also have middle school teachers working on a food drive at the holidays. We've given other items to Rolling Hills in terms of clothing. Dr. Ziegler and I think Mrs. Gallion have taught the GED course at Rolling Hills. We have a community cleanup day. And so we have a myriad of things that our administrators and teachers are doing. And as a thank you, Laura presented this to us, and I just wanted you to be aware of that. And thank you.
Okay, I think we're going to move on tonight. I did not receive any public comment requests. Sure.
Albert Leach, Turnberry Farms, Upper Pottsgrove. The chart that they put up was absolutely beautiful. It's very easy to understand for the entire public. You can see the different things. The only thing I was disappointed in the board in this question is why didn't anybody ask the question, what percentage of students was in each track? Because the chart's great, but if you have 80% of your students in the top track taking all the lower courses and only 10% of your students in the most aggressive track, that can be an issue. You have the AP Statistics, as I said, the AP Calculus AB, and the AP Calculus BC. You have to have a large enough classroom that is ready. Of course, that's the important thing, that they're ready to be able to progress. I can tell you from a fact, and obviously some of the board members here have students that have already graduated, and obviously, Dee, we have, both have juniors and such like that are looking at colleges. I've been to 5 different college admission programs, UCLA, UCSD, Pittsburgh, Carnegie Mellon, and Penn State. All 5 said the exact same thing. The most important thing is the rigor of the curriculum that the student takes to being accepted to the colleges. If our rigor of curriculum for too many students is in that higher track, then they're not going to be college ready or be accepted to some of the colleges. And that's where I think is an issue if that is the perception of what's acceptable. We shouldn't have the typical track of more than 50% in the top class. Yes, every student is different, and every student has to go through the progression as best for them. But we need to work on how many is going through which track. Thank you.
I hate to disappoint you, Al, so I'll ask the question, but I don't expect an answer right this moment. What percentage of our students are in each of the track?
So, all good questions. Is this still on? One of the things I want to say, just to clear up, if a student is taking that top path, that does not say that a child is not career or college or career ready, okay? Does it mean that they did not take a certain level of mathematical concepts or contents? It does. Does it mean that they're not college and career ready? It does not. That is why the state of Pennsylvania and Common Core state standards provide those mathematical standards right up to grade 8, insinuating or telling us that students will therefore take Algebra 1 in 9th grade. So I just want to clear that up, first of all, okay? The percentages. I don't necessarily have percentages of what this looks like for all those different opportunities because we talked about it, it's fluid. It's fluid because kids, as Mrs. Artem said, there's decisions being made every day about what's going to occur for students next year, okay? So it's a very fluid looking kind of process, okay? I can tell you that Dr. Ramage and I have looked at some preliminary data. We're already starting to look at data about what's going to happen for students next year, okay? We're really excited because of those students in that top pathway that we were showing you, those students taking 6th grade Common Core, there are currently 90 students who are scoring 96% or higher, okay? That's a substantial number. That's almost half of the students in that particular class. So what does that tell us? That's showing, now does that mean every kid is going to get to the end of this year and every one of those is going to move on to Algebra 1? No, it does not. Does it mean every one of them is going to jump into 7-8 condensed next year? No, it does not, because again, we have to look at multiple pieces of data. But we have preliminary data that shows us that students are going to be ready to move on. Looking at our students currently taking 7th grade Common Core, we already have 20 students in that particular class who are scoring 95% or higher. Again, that's just one data point, but it's showing us a positive trend that students are going to be ready to take Algebra 1. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome.
I do want to just note real quick before we go on that we did start tonight's meeting a little bit late because we had an executive session beforehand for personnel reasons. So we're moving on now to report of the superintendent.
I recommend that we approve the professional staff items as submitted.
I heard a motion and a second. Is there any comments or questions? All those for? Aye. Any of the opposed? Motion passed.
I recommend that you approve the support staff items as submitted.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? All those opposed, or for? Aye. Opposed? Motion passes.
I recommend that you approve the supplemental special payments as submitted.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? All those for? Opposed? Motion passes.
I recommend that you approve the miscellaneous items as submitted with an effective date of November 11th, 2014.
So moved.
Any questions? All those for? Opposed? Motion passes.
I recommend that you authorize the administration to execute a contract addendum with Education Alternatives as presented.
I have a motion and a second. Any questions? All those for? Opposed? Motion passes.
I move to lump all business items together.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Before we go there, though, I want to make a comment about number 4. If everyone looks at their information they were given tonight versus what was in our packet ahead of time, we have, and I know this because I'm on the Parks and Rec board, that we adjusted the budget a little bit from what your original numbers were. Basically, the proposed number had a proposed deficit of, I think, around $1,200, but Jill Ludi has adjusted that and come up with a balanced budget for 2015. So as long as we're all in agreement, that's what we're voting for. Any questions then? Hear none. All those for? Opposed? Motion passes.
Moving on to education, I recommend that you approve the mentors as presented.
So moved.
Any questions? All those for? Opposed? Motion passes.
For discussion items this evening, we have, we'd like Chris Turtell to come forward from Herbine and Company to talk with us about our end-of-year audit.
Good evening. It's been an educational experience this evening for myself there. Since I'm not sure if this is working or not, I'll just talk a little loud and we'll just go from there. So, my name is Chris Turtell. I'm a senior manager from Herbine and Company. For those of you who might be a little new, Herbine and Company, we're about a 110-person firm headquartered in Reading, and we service about 25 school districts, intermediate units, and colleges, both in eastern Pennsylvania and also in western Pennsylvania. So I was the lead auditor this year in the Pottsgrove School District audit. And just a couple minutes, and I'm going to keep it somewhat brief, but please stop me if you have any questions along the way. More than happy to answer them. If you'd like to follow along, I'll flip around a little bit, but I'll try and keep it somewhat succinct here. I'm going to start on page 1. So you'll get the table of contents, and then you'll get to page 1. It looks like this. It's our actual auditor's report. So the district receives an unmodified opinion in our auditor's report. So unmodified is the clean opinion that we can give. Means we had no material adjustments to the audit as we went through the financial statements that were given to us. So from a standpoint of an auditor, that is a clean audit opinion. The district, as far as I can remember, has sent unmodified opinions throughout. So that's a tribute to your accounting staff to keep things where they should be. Directly following that is the management's discussion and analysis. The MD&A, as it's called, is an opportunity for Dave and Ms. Viola and her staff to come together and put into words everything that happened during the year. So I encourage you, if you're not a numbers person, to read through the MD&A. It gives a nice, succinct highlight of what occurred, variances that happened during certain budget items, and then economic and current challenges and how the board is looking to face those challenges, or the administration is looking to face those challenges going forward. So I'm going to talk about some numbers. I'm going to flip all the way towards the back to pages 42 and 43. It will open up across the scene in this fashion. Yours won't have all the red ink on it, but it'll look like this. So pages 42 and 43, this is your general fund. So the general fund handles almost all the educational expenses and revenues of the district. I like to look at this schedule because it gives you a comparison of your final budget to your actual revenues and expenditures and a variance of there. So on the revenue side, you'll see two places where the revenue came in under budget for this year, under state sources and under federal sources. State sources, the moratorium on PlanCon, so that would be the reimbursement that you receive from the state. The 2010 general obligation bond finally actually received some back payment for that in 2014, 14-15 recently. But that finally did go through. It was not happening in 13-14, created some of that deficit. On the federal sources side, that deficit is a result of access funding. So access funding, as many of you are aware, many of your students require certain help in certain instances throughout the day. Those costs can be applied for to be reimbursed. The state transferred from one agency to another in charge of access. When that took place, they made that a lot more rigorous for the districts to be able to receive that reimbursement. So it's really slowed the access funds to all of our school districts. And I know this is something Dave's looking at as the 15-16 budget now, I guess you're starting to put together, and seeing where those funds are still going to be able to flow into the district. So overall, we're looking at revenues of about $500,000 below budgeted amounts. On the expenditure side, expenditures become a little bit more of a challenge to, at this level, you're seeing at the function level. So you're seeing variances for instruction, vocational ed, special education. Being that the district's funds, 75 to 80% of all of your expenditures are salaries and benefits. You've had a lot of turnover in the administrative side this year, central administration. You've had some interims coming in and out. Even interims coming in and out at their hourly and their daily rate doesn't have the same benefits and other items that carries the same weight that a full-time administrator would, especially, for instance, the curriculum development position that was created and not filled during the year. And a couple other salary variances that we look at throughout the audit. The district also was able to save about $200,000 through some efficiency and energy this year. So it's another step in the right direction, being a little more conscientious and moving ahead with that energy projects. So total expenditures, the bottom of page 42. You will see a total expenditure number of $58,882,406 and a positive variance of $1,844,000 on the expenditure side. Page 43, the only item on page 43 is your budgetary reserve, which the district was not in need of this year. So what that allowed the district realized a $703,960 surplus in the general fund for the current year. When we look at that as a percentage of the $60 million in overall expenditures, we're talking a little over 1% of your total budgeted expenditures for the year. So taking into consideration, I know that there was some planned use of fund balance for the retirement increases this year, and I know that that had been scaled back but we're still within 1.5% of expenditures, which is fairly close on our side. We have districts that are a lot further off than that. So it's a good sign when we look at that and we see that it's fairly close in line. So, any questions on the budget to actuals? I know it's a little bit more of a higher level, but anybody have a specific question? So that leaves us with about $11,851,000 in fund balance in the general fund.
What percentage is that?
Of
So is that our, that $11 million fund balance, is that our reserve?
it is. We're going to flip back. If we flip back to page 5, that'll answer your question as we move along. And make sure we're on page 5, not MD&A page 5. So you flip through the MD&A. Page 5 will say the balance sheet for the governmental funds. Left-hand column on the bottom, you'll see the breakdown of it, $11,851,000. So the board has committed buckets for retirement incentives, compensated absences, and future retirement rate increases. Those commitments remain the same as they were in the 12-13 school year. The board actually recommitted the $500,000 that was going to be used in the 13-14 budget, put it back into that committed line item there. Athletics still does have a small piece in the general fund. Remember, athletics and general fund got collapsed together about 2-3 years ago. The budgeted deficit of $1,212,000 really represents the budgetary reserve for the 14-15 school year. And in the $3,633,000, that is your unassigned reserve, which is about a little less than 6%, I believe, 6 or 7% of your 2014-15 budget. Over your policy of 5, under the state recommendation of 8. Does that work? Perfect. Column right next to that's capital projects. So capital projects, right next to the $11 million, you'll see a $19 million number. That $19 million includes $13 million of bond proceeds at June 30th that were taken out for the high school renovation project. That also leaves $6 million of surpluses from the general fund that have been transferred in for capital projects and capital needs. So that is the breakdown at June 30. Now, I know there's been significant activity at the high school since then, and that makes sense to us when we look and we see we have about $30 million in commitments outstanding at June 30th. So I know you'll be taking out some future bond issues to cover those costs. All right, then I'll spend a few minutes on the proprietary funds, so page 11. You'll see 2 columns on page 11. The first represents your food service, cafeteria, and the second represents the internal service fund, which is where your district self-insurance for health insurance prescription flows through. So food service, basically a break-even kind of year, about $6,000 if you look at the third number from the bottom. Since you're outsourcing for food service, realistically, it's just going to keep right around that same place, which is where you want to be. The internal service fund, the district actually had the self-insurance for the district has been in place for like about 4 years now. And when it first went into place, as all of you know, the claims went the wrong direction. Presented more of a challenge than actually you had anticipated it going to be changing. So the district, about a year and a half ago, I guess it would be by now, implemented some changes to that program. You entered into CPAS, the Southeastern Pennsylvania Schools Trust. In that, you had the opportunity to switch from Independence Administrators to Independence Blue Cross, which actually allowed the district to realize some more discounts, so to speak, at local medical establishments that you weren't receiving as much from Independence Administrators. You also changed premiums on certain programs to allow the district and really the staff and the district to realize still have the same benefits, but understand the cost consciousness of those benefits. Many of the items worked last year. So the district claims spiked down. Now, whether that means they're going to stay there or not, tough to tell. Again, it's a short history. So what we look at, and we've had many discussions with Mr. Nestor, is trying to discuss At year end, the district was able to have about $4.5 million set aside in a reserve for catastrophic claims. We always recommend our districts that are self-insured to have at least 3, if not closer to 4 months worth of reserve, because you want to mitigate the exposure that you have with self-insurance. You have stop-loss coverage that does protect you to some degree, but we want to make sure that, it's an insurance risk. We want to make sure that we have that mitigation there. With the year that happened in 2013-14, that reserve actually pushed up almost to 7 months worth of claims. When the district first began to be self-insured, you transferred some money over from the general fund to help build that base, to make sure you mitigated that risk. That was about $1.5 million worth of funds that were transferred over at that point in time. Our conversations, and you'll see also in the management letter that we enclosed, discuss, okay, so we've built that reserve up to almost 7 months now. Although we don't have a long claims history, we do see some movement where you've reduced premiums for 14-15, or 14-15, and the stop loss actually was increased, which gives you a little bit more risk as a district, but lets you cap some of your administrative costs. We would like to see just continually monitoring that to make sure that we're not building too much of a reserve. And if it gets to the point, and one of our points is you did transfer this $1.5 million over there to start, you may want to rethink that as we're moving into the next year or two of maybe we can use that money, bring it out, and use it somewhere else to help. Now, keep in mind, it's a one-time revenue infusion. So, as an auditor, we never recommend using one-time costs for the one-time revenue infusion for recurring costs. However, it may be an opportunity for the district to look at that and see maybe there's a need or something you can pull, and even if it's future budgets, what it might be to take a look at that money and see what makes sense. So it's a good thing to have healthy employees, and I hope that trend does continue for you, and hopefully we see that going forward.
As it stands right now, so you're saying we have about 7 months of reserve, and you typically recommend 3 to 4 months.
Yeah, we typically recommend, we like to see 4 months.
So what's the delta in terms of dollars right now?
It pretty much works out to that $1.5 million number, so to speak.
So theoretically, since it's a one-time use, we could decide at year's end to reduce that reserve to 3 to 4 months and supplement our capital reserve fund via that means, as an example, rather than using the surplus money from the previous year. Or of course, we could do both if we wanted to as well, but that's the kind of thing that you're talking about, correct?
Exactly, and looking at how the district is embarking on a very large construction project now in the high school, keeping in mind that you have buildings such as the middle school, which I'm sure many of you still think is a new building, because I think of it as a newer building, but you're getting to the point where HVAC systems and other items are probably coming towards their end of the life, so definitely worth thinking about where this money could be used elsewhere.
Now, did you say that you recommended that we wait to see what happens with all the changes for next year before we make any of those decisions?
And I would definitely see how 14-15 goes.
Okay.
13-14 really sunk pretty dramatically. So the question that we have, and working with Mr. Nestor, is, was it the larger discounts from Independence Blue Cross? Was it just a down year in claims? Where is that going to fall? Because you don't want to be too aggressive and then end up on the opposite side of the coin. And I believe that's something we agreed upon in that.
So when will we realistically know?
I'll leave that to Dave to his comfort level.
There isn't an urgency at this point to transfer it. I think as we go through the remainder of this fiscal year, we continue to monitor our claims utilization and see how this year is going. That's still not a guarantee that next year it couldn't spike up. But we do have some graphical presentations that we can share with the board to show how drastic the change was, because we were going like this, and then all of a sudden we went like this. I hope it stays. Really hope it stays. But I think we need to be conscious that we were at a much higher level, and it could return there at any time. So my suggestion is at this point in time is let's monitor through the rest of this year. We can make a decision in May, we can make a decision in August. It really doesn't matter. We can make that decision at any given point in time.
Just seems to me that that amount is very close to the amount that we have in escrow right now with the high school project. I mean, it's less, but it's a sizable chunk.
Yes.
So I think it would be a judicious use of those funds if they prove to be available.
Right, correct.
The other issue or item, just to point out, with that reserve, half of it actually resides in the district accounts, and the other half actually resides at the trust. I know Mr. Nestor and Mr. Linke have been looking at that and seeing the avenues to make sure that the reserve that's at the trust, because the trust actually recommends having their 3 to 4 months at the trust to give them their protection also. See how that moves, and obviously the best thing for the district would be to make sure as much money you keep in your own accounts as you can, to have more control over that money than at the trust. So I know that's something they're looking into also. One last point I do want to make is on page 52. So page 52 is the summary of our audited results. So it's the only actual page in the report where you'll see the words unmodified. You'll see them twice. So we have them on the financial statement and also on the federal programs. So the district received over $500,000 in federal funding. We tested the IDEA program this year, which represents $600,000 and about 36% of your total federal funding. And we had no findings in internal control or compliance with that program, and no findings in internal control or compliance over the items that we tested on the financial statement side also. So for us as auditors, this is a clean, and this is the cleanest you will see this page. So that's a true tribute to not only your financial staff, but also your program staff and the IDEA to make sure all the compliance items that we tested were in place. So you do have a management letter included. Again, one of the main points in there is just to let you know as a board, again, that you have this opportunity to take a look at that reserve and see maybe, as 14-15 does progress, what makes sense in the sense of taking some of that money out. And a couple other little points in there. One of them, if any of you do have your own business or are interested, in the governor's latest budget, he shortened the escheat period from 5 years to 3 years for escheat property. Many people didn't catch that little change that he did there, so make sure if you are responsible for escheating property, you change that from 5 years to 3 years. So. Any questions or anything I can address?
As always, I would just like to thank you, because I know from you having the history with our school district, you're right on target where we need to be. You know the history, and hands go off to our business manager and his staff to keep Pottsgrove in a good position we're in. So thank you.
Thank you. There is one issue that I just wanted to mention, and Chris is certainly welcome to chime in on this. But for our next year audit report, we focused in on the fund level financial statements for most of the discussions, but there are entity-wide financial statements that are presented in accordance with governmental accounting standards. Basically, they value everything as an organization as though we were a business. So we have our fixed assets and our debt all presented on the balance sheet. There is a new standard that will come into play for our next audit. GASB Statement 67 and 68, which deal with recognition of pension liabilities. Historically, this has been a state pension fund, and really there was no recognition of a liability on the school district level financial statements because we weren't controlling the fund. GASB 67 and 68 have changed that, and now beginning next year we will be required to pick up our proportionate share of the unfunded pension liability for the PSERS system. This year our net assets are approximately $61 million, I believe.
Yeah, page 3, if anybody wants to follow along, that's where the government-wide statement of net position is.
Next year, we will need to pick up a liability for our proportionate share of the unfunded pension liability of PSERS, And as a rough thumbnail estimate, we're projecting that to be about $75 million. So on next year's financial statement, on the entity-wide statements, Pottsgrove and probably every other school district in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania will show a deficit of net assets. So it's such a huge number. I just wanted you guys to be aware of it. There's no change in operations. Nothing changed from one day to the next, but our financial statements are going to look much worse on an entity-wide basis next year.
Could that affect our bond rating?
And that's an interesting point you make about bond rating. So on the net position side, obviously it's not going to look good for overall. Most school districts, and I can tell you all the schools we have, are going to show large negative numbers there, especially when you factor in most of your net position sits in fixed assets. So you're not selling a building to pay your pension. And you have no ability to pay that quicker. You pay as a function of whatever the state government passes, what the standard rate's going to be. If you would look at page 4, though, page 4 shows your statement of activity. So this really shows, again, pulling in your assets and liabilities, what your change is on the entity-wide level. So if you stay on the right-hand side of the seam, third number from the bottom, you'll see a positive $4,650,267. In 2012, that number was $4,184,000. In 2013, it was $4,882,000. So that positive trend is actually going to be something that the bond rating agencies are looking at pretty heavily to see. They knew this pension liability was out there. It's not like it wasn't there. It just didn't actually hit the statements before. But that positive trend is really going to show how healthy the school district is. So that's really, hopefully, what we're hearing is going to be a part of that ratings conversation. I can also tell you that I have districts that just refunded this year whose rating actually increased. So even though this is out there, it doesn't seem to have an effect on the market at this point. And I know you're actually looking to borrow some additional funds for the high school project soon. But it will be interesting to see how this all, because it's not a Pennsylvania thing, it's an across the country thing. But each state has a different system, so not everybody's going to have that full effect that we do.
In follow-up to that, as we've gone through our bond rating conversations in the past, it's usually a lot of questions directed at me as to what we're doing. I've turned it around on our bond rating agencies in each of the last two and said, hey, we know this is coming. What is it going to mean to us? And in every situation that I've talked to a bond rating agent, they've said the same thing that Chris just said. We know there's a unfunded pension liability. We're aware of it. We're already factoring it into your bond ratings. So we don't anticipate it. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but we don't anticipate any changes to our bond ratings as a result.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, I do thank Dave and his staff, and we enjoy every year coming out here and servicing the district, and hope to continue that going forward. So thank you, everybody.
Is there any other discussion items that we're aware of?
I have one thing. Patty reminded me it is Veterans Day, and I think we'd be remiss if we didn't honor the veterans. I was reminded, after she mentioned it, of a quote from John Adams. He said, "I study politics and war so that my sons may have the liberty to study mathematics and philosophy." So we honor the veterans that have given their lives and their service so that we can have what we have today in this country.
Hey, we're going to move on to our committee reports. Chloe, I think you're first.
Okay, so I'd like to review the one-to-one initiative. This past Friday, I attended presentations that were given by Dr. Ziegler and Mr. Wagman regarding one-to-one. I attended 2 sessions for the juniors and the seniors. Overall, because I went to both, I noticed that both were consistent in the information that they gave. I learned about the student digital teams, which were created which are going to be created for the purpose of learning more about the program. So my next question would just, for this next step, would be how the program is going to be implemented and advertised. There was conversation from other students. They were saying that there's going to be, I guess, I'm not sure who it would be specifically, but going around to classes and asking students different questions about one-to-one and giving them more information. And I personally think this would be a more effective way to hear more from the students, because it would be in a more intimate setting. Some of the questions that were at the assembly this past Friday that I heard were, what if my computer breaks? Is there a buyback program for the graduating seniors? Can we add specific programs? And questions about the Wi-Fi. Just from listening to conversations, students still have concerns with the network capacity. This was expressed at the assembly, and Dr. Ziegler and Mr. Wagner seemed confident that it would be able, that the Wi-Fi would, or I'm sorry, that the network would be able to hold a large amount of devices. However, I think that we all still feel that there's a lot of anxiety with this program. Understanding that there's a lot of risk with any new initiatives, students would still like to be included in the discussion of the implementation. So these past 3 meetings, I've been focusing a lot on the high school, and I'm going to be gauging some different opinions from the middle school and possibly the elementary schools for December. Thank you.
Thank you, Chloe. And just to make a piggyback kind of on what Chloe had said, that Dr. Ziegler and Mr. Wagman will be going around through each social studies class to try to elicit feedback from the students in that smaller setting in a classroom, and then allow them to ask additional questions. And then the Wi-Fi. I don't know if this came out in the assembly because it seemed to kind of get brushed over, but right now our students that are using their own device are using our guest network. And I think that's where some of the perceptions perhaps from students about it not being strong enough, because that certainly isn't anything near or close to what we have for our internal network. And the new laptops that you'll be receiving will run through the internal network, not the guest network. So those are two completely different things. So that might be something, I did hear students seem confused about that, and I don't know that Mr. Wagman addressed it clearly enough. So that, I appreciate you bringing that up, because that'll be something that we certainly need to maybe reiterate when we go around to the classrooms. So thank you.
Shelley, there are persistent questions on social media about the one-to-one program focusing on homework and the opinions of some parents that they don't need to buy the insurance and have the kids bring their machines home with them. And yet confusion from those same parents about whether they will be harming their children by making that decision in terms of their ability to get homework done. Again, I don't know if I require an answer to the question right now. I tried to point actually the administration to the thread, because there were some really good questions, and I was struggling to answer them effectively. But the basic gist of it is an example would be if I have an iPad already, could I do my homework using my own iPad at home rather than pay for the insurance? And I think that it's not really the insurance that is stopping people, but rather the deductible. If something goes wrong, one parent, for example, talked about little brothers and sisters that have a tendency to get into electronic devices and treat them poorly, and that particular parent really didn't want a new machine in their house for fear that they'd end up having to pay for not just the insurance, but then also the deductible. So I personally just think that our facts or the information we're putting out might spend a little more time to address that line of questioning. for the sake of these parents, hopefully to convince them that it is worth their money to take the machines home rather than leave them in the library every day.
Can I just piggyback on that? I would like to reach out to all the parents who do the social media. If they do have a question, they should come to the administration office, because maybe the other folks aren't on the social media, and maybe there's more people who have questions. Instead of going there, they should be more helpful and instrumental to go to the administration with these questions.
I think that, you know, we actually, through this thread, were able to answer a lot of people's questions, and for whatever reason, they felt comfortable taking that approach. I certainly don't disagree with you, but whatever approach they use, we want to make sure we reach them. And that just reminded me that another parent was saying, well, what if I'm not on social media, and what if I didn't attend any of the meetings for whatever reason, and what if I don't have email? How are we making sure that we're reaching those parents so that they get their paperwork completed and you know, get their kids' machines?
Well, I know we've sent out numerous reminders about that, and we're also posting, we video taped the third session. So I'm not sure if Mr. Wagman was able to post that today, but it was our intent to post that session for their review. We have those packets available in the school offices that we were distributing at the meetings. And if any parent has additional information, I mean, I can answer most of their questions. Mr. Becker, Dr. Ramage, Dr. Ziegler, Mr. Madden, Mr. Wagman. I mean, we can all answer their questions.
I guess what I'm saying is, what if they just don't know? I mean, you'd think that they would, because you're having the meetings with the students.
Well, we talk with the kids, and we, you know, have to charge the kids with taking home some information, and also reaching out to the parents through the many means that we have. To answer your question about the, can they use their own iPad? Perhaps. I mean, it depends on the assignment, because, you know, part of the beauty of the one-to-one is that we're maintaining the software, the apps that we're putting on those devices, and we're not maintaining the software and the apps that they may or may not have on a device at home. And should the assignment require a specific piece of software or app, they might not be able to do the assignment. If it's, you know, requiring them to just utilize the internet for some particular reason, then perhaps they could use that device. It all depends on the assignment. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Chloe. We're going to move on. Next, we want to have the minutes approved from the policy committee. Someone want to make a motion?
A motion we accept the minutes of the policy committee meeting held on October 28th, 2014.
All right, all those in favor? Aye. Thanks. Next, we did have a operations and facility committee tonight prior to the meeting. Ted, would you like to make any comments about what was talked about there?
I do have good news. I think we had talked about some damage to the chillers at West, and the administration is looking at filing for an insurance reimbursement on that. So we may be able to get some monies back to help cover some of the costs that we have incurred in doing the repairs on it. Also, we're looking at the purchase of a new vehicle for snowplow. We've got an old failing truck, and we've put out a bid for it. We got obtained the lowest bid, and for I think it's around $40,000, we're going to get a brand new F-250 snowplow with salting on the rear, and it's real nice. It's going to serve us well, and it's going to replace some old equipment that's been a lot of maintenance problems. So, and we'll have the minutes from that meeting available at the next meeting for approval.
All right, thanks, Ted. Moving on, Patty, we're going to have receiving of the accounts. Or you want to do that in new business? We'll do the JOC in new business. Yeah.
I move that we accept the high school accounts, middle school accounts, and cafeteria accounts as presented.
So moved.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I move that we approve the payments of invoices in the amount of $4,446,599.93 for October 2014 as presented.
So moved.
All those in favor? Aye.
I move that we approve the treasurer's report for October 2014 as presented and file it for audit.
All those in favor? Aye. New business. Patty, you want to go ahead first?
Yes, a couple things. Over at the Western Center, we are really hopping. The new director has brought so much excitement. I encourage everybody to go on Facebook. They have everything from extended hours to get your nails done, hair done. I think it's Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. They have lunch from 11:30 to 1. Again, it's all wrapped around the students to give the students hours to help them. And we did have a community dinner, which was very successful. And every month we're going to do a different dinner. And I think January we're going to have one scheduled for the theme of the Chinese New Year. So I encourage everybody to look on Facebook, look on the website, westerncenter.org. Some new exciting news is we have currently about 510 students. Our max that we can hold is about 900. So at our last meeting, we had decided for the school year 2015 and 16, we're going to be opening our doors to ninth graders, and this will be an enrollment in a new cluster program. Basically, the way it was described to us is if we have a plane, we pay for as many students can fit. So why don't we have 2 students or 10 students, why don't we just fill the whole plane up? So that's basically what we're going to do. It's not going to cost any more money, but it's also going to give the ninth graders an opportunity to see if this might be something of interest to them. Again, the principals will be working hand in hand with the students and the guidance counselors to make sure that they have the right students for this. But we are very, very excited about this. And a reminder, too, that there are 18 programs that the Western Center offers. So we are very excited. Wednesday, December 3rd, will be open house. 5 to 6 p.m. Will be student parents only. And then from 6 to 8:30 will be a community open house. And again, I encourage everyone to come and see everything that's being offered at the Western Center. It'll blow your mind. Also, our environmental design students are going to have a holiday open house, and that will be December 3rd, 5 to 8:30, and then December 4th and 5th from 8 to 12. Again, they'll be selling poinsettias, all types of greeneries. Again, it's all for our students. They're learning how to make it, how to sell it, how to market it, and it's a win-win. So again, I just encourage everybody to look at them on Facebook, look at their website. It's the best kept secret, and we are just so excited, the JOC, to be on that committee. We are just so proud of our students. So good things are happening over there at the Western Center. That's all.
Thanks, Patty. Does anyone else have anything to add?
One more thing, and I'm only going to spend a minute on it. I spent a lot of time this past week going through the school performance profile data and looking at some other neighboring districts, and started putting together a little spreadsheet that looks at the percent proficient, the PVAS, and the percent advanced. And I actually just wanted to focus on one thing. I was really just focusing on the middle school because that's obviously where we went down. Boyertown's writing scores, particularly in terms of the percentage that went, percentage advanced from the previous 2 years ago to last year, showed some pretty remarkable increases, and they were already significantly ahead of us in terms of their percentage advanced, though pretty close to us in terms of the overall percentage proficient. But you get extra points for your advanced in terms of the school performance profile. For example, what their West junior high school went from 10.99 to 29.64 advanced, pretty much a threefold increase in 1 year, and not as significant in the other junior high, 20.6 to 27. I'm just really curious to know what they're doing with writing, because whatever it is, it appears to be really working well. And I'm not saying what we're doing, particularly the elementary schools, aren't working well as well, but it was just remarkable to see those numbers. So I just wanted to point that out to you, Shelley, and I'll be happy to share the spreadsheet as well.
Anyone else?
I do have one more thing I totally forgot about, and I don't know how I can forget about it. Our cross-country boys. I don't know if you've heard about them, but they competed at the States, and they came back. They're 6th overall in AA. And at this time, I would like to make a motion that we award District AA championship jackets for the boys. Very excited, and we will meet them in December's meeting. And plaques.
Patty, this will be both for their Pac-10 championship and District
yes.
1 championship as well,
Yes.
right? Okay. Okay. We got a motion and a second. Correct. Is there any public comment or questions relating to this motion? All right. All those in favor then? Aye. All right, opposed? Motion passed. I have one last thing to add, and this is sports related, but not, of course, cross country. Just about football, for those that aren't aware, our football team is traveling to Springford this Friday night to compete. Springfield, Delaware County, not Springfield. Yes. Very limited parking at that school. Gary Dorenzo has done the task of arranging to have some fan buses, or at least one bus, to go. I think the deadline to sign up is 3 p.m. on Thursday, sign up at the school. It is only $3 for the bus. You can't beat that for traffic and parking. So Chloe, hopefully you can recruit people to fill the buses as well, but if everyone else can pass word on, hopefully we can get as many people down there as possible. And good luck, Grove. With that, I'll take a motion for adjournment.
Sorry, I have one more thing. Sorry, I keep trying to jump in there and everybody else jumps in before me. I just wanted to put in a plug for our music programs. District-wide, our holiday concerts are starting December 2nd. That's our first, and going all the way through the month of December and actually into January as well. So encourage everybody, especially board members, to come and attend a holiday concert.
Dee, while you're at it, how did the marching band perform at States?
They went to States this past Saturday, and they got their best score that they've had all year. I think it was a 91. So they did really, really well.
All right.
Dave, that football game, by the way, is on the list of potential games to be showed on NBC 10, and we can all vote for that, and we can vote on each and every device we own.
Friday Night Blitz. We're the one of 3 games that's out there to be voted on, and right now we have a 65% lead, and so we're doing well, hopefully. But keep voting. You have until Wednesday night to vote.
Vote early and vote often.
Yes. All right, with that, I'll take a motion again to adjourn the meeting. All right. All those in favor for adjournment? Aye. Good night. And by the way, everyone, please have some snacks at the back before you leave.